and intensive care at home. My name is Patrik Hutzel from Intensive Care Hotline and Intensive Care at Home, and I want to welcome you to another live stream today. I've decided to do an ad hoc live stream today because there was really good interaction on the live stream yesterday, lots of questions from our viewers and participants. So I just thought I might just carry on and see whether we'll get anyone on the live stream today that has any questions. If not, I will talk about some topics that are of interest for you anyway. So I usually do these live streams once a week. I usually do them on a Saturday evening, Eastern Standard Time at 8:30 p.m., which is 5:30 p.m. on a Saturday Pacific Time, 10:30 a.m. Sydney, Melbourne time in Australia on a Sunday. And I usually talk about topics that are relevant for families in intensive care. I usually elaborate on a topic where we get questions, where we get emails, where we talk to clients, that I usually do a deep dive into that topic, because intensive care is such a complex and highly specialized area. It feels to me like I should be doing those videos all day, every day, and do nothing else, because there are just so many unknowns for families in intensive care. And as I always say, the biggest challenge for families in intensive care is simply that they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to look for. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know their rights, and they don't know how to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care. And that's our angle we take here at intensivecarehotline.com to help families all over the world in intensive care to navigate this ever-changing and ever-challenging territory. Okay, so before we answer some questions today, I obviously want to quickly introduce myself and also introduce why I'm qualified to answer questions for families in intensive care. So my name is Patrik Hutzel. I am a critical care / intensive care nurse by background. I have worked in intensive care for 25 years, nearly 25 years in 3 different countries. Out of those nearly 25 years in intensive care, I worked for over 5 years as a nurse unit manager in intensive care. So managed large workforces, managed doctors, managed hospital CEOs, hospital directors of nursing, managed and engaged with a wide variety of stakeholders in the intensive care world. Also, after my time in intensive care, I founded a service, Intensive Care at Home, where we are now providing home care nursing services for long-term intensive care patients, where we provide a genuine alternative for a long-term stay in intensive care for long-term intensive care patients. And we've been successfully operating this business now since 2014. I'm also the founder and director of intensivecarehotline.com, where we consult families in intensive care all over the world, where we help families with their challenges when they have a loved one in intensive care. And this is what this live stream is all about, to answer your questions if you have a loved one in intensive care. Now, while we're still waiting for the people to come in, I just want to, want you to answer any questions, ask any questions on this stream. There's nothing that I can't answer, I believe. I've worked in the intensive care world for so long that I think there aren't many things that I haven't come across in my time in intensive care. Now, okay, while we're waiting for some people to come in, I just want to start with some frustrations that families have all the time in intensive care. And I want to start with a question that came in last night that one of our readers sent to us, and I just quickly need to bring it up in my emails. Just give me a second. Where is it? Just give me 1 second. Yeah, so one reader writes, my mother was placed on Ecmo this morning, day one after open heart surgery. Doctors say kidney failure, heart failure, fluid overload. What are the chances of survival? What a great question our reader quickly here sends. So many of you may not even know what is Ecmo, and I've done countless videos and articles about Ecmo, but I'll give you the brief version. If someone is in heart failure and the heart is potentially not pumping, or is more or less a bypass machine that is able to take over the function of the heart for a period of time. Okay, so sometimes patients after a heart attack, after cardiac arrest, after cardiac surgery, after heart transplants end up on Ecmo to have the function of the heart taken over for a period of time. Basically what that means is the two cannulas get put into the body, into the arteries and into the vein. Blood is being extracted and it's being run through a bypass machine. The blood is being oxygenated and carbon dioxide is removed, which is similar to what's normally happening in the lungs. And then blood is being reinfused and the heart can more or less have a break in pumping because the machine is doing the work. Now, obviously, that is only a temporary fix, but nevertheless, it is a temporary fix and it gives the rest of the body and the heart in particular time to heal and rest and recover from there. Now, there's no guarantee, obviously, that people do recover, but I have seen people recover on Ecmo, no question about that. So why is Ecmo being used when our reader quickly says open heart surgery, kidney failure, heart failure, fluid overload? What a great question. Now, whilst I don't have the exact details, but why has Quigley's loved one had open heart surgery? Most likely because there's been a heart attack, because she's talking about heart failure and fluid overload. Basically what might have happened is that there was a heart attack, the heart muscle is weakened, and therefore open heart surgery took place to replace some of the blocked arteries. And then the heart nevertheless was going into failure. Maybe they were on inotropes or vasopressors such as adrenaline, noradrenaline, dobutamine, milrinone, maybe levosimendan, but that all still wasn't enough. Maybe the ejection fraction or the contractility of the heart was very low despite all the efforts with heart surgery and inotropes and vasopressors. And then the next step was to start Ecmo, right? To give the heart a break. Okay. Now, I'm therefore also not surprised that the patient went into kidney failure, because if the heart doesn't pump or is not strong enough to pump and perfuse all organs, including the kidneys would go into kidney failure, right? So it's sort of a common scenario in ICU that I've seen over and over again, where patients end up with a heart attack, end up in heart failure, ejection fraction is poor, they end up on inotropes and vasopressors, again, such as noradrenaline, adrenaline, also known as norepinephrine or epinephrine for our viewers in the US. They might have been on milrinone, dobutamine to improve contractility of the heart. They might have been on levosimendan to improve contractility of the heart. And nevertheless, they might have been on vasopressin, for example, and nevertheless, that didn't work for whatever reason. It wasn't enough. And that's when they most likely used Ecmo. Now, it also says that their loved one went into fluid overload. Again, I am not surprised there. Why would they have gone into fluid overload? Again, picture this. So you've got a weak heart and a weak heart muscle after potentially a heart attack or after heart failure, and after cardiomyopathy, for example. And then if the heart isn't strong enough to pump, fluids automatically push back into the lungs, right? Because the heart and the lungs are connected. And if the heart doesn't pump strong enough, right, there's fluids pushing back into the lungs. On top of that, you've got a patient that's in kidney failure. So you've got the heart not pumping, you've got kidney failure, and of course, there will be then fluids accumulating in the lungs, and that's when Ecmo can help, in combination also with dialysis or continuous renal replacement therapy, also known as CRRT. Okay, so when you walk into ICU and you see all this machinery and you see all these medications going in, you would feel overwhelmed and you would be wondering what is going on here. Okay, and that is what's going on here, right? Obviously, there would be other issues to be looked at, such as chest x-rays, such as blood results, such as arterial blood gases, such as what other medications is this patient on, what has happened during surgery, has there been bleeding during surgery, has there been another heart attack during surgery, has there been issues with clotting of the blood. There could be so many issues going on, have there been blood transfusion needed during surgery because of bleeding, and therefore there was fluid overload, not only because of the heart contractility being too weak and of kidney failure, also because too many fluids were needed to replace bleeding, right? So it is a very complex situation when someone is in a situation like that. So, but now you might be wondering what is next if someone is on Ecmo in ICU, and especially for cardiac failure. What are the next steps? So I'll tell you what the next steps are. Obviously, the heart condition needs to be stabilized. It's good that the heart can sort of take a little bit of a break while the Ecmo machine is doing the work for the heart. Okay, so in the meantime, an ultrasound of the heart will be done. A TOE might be done. A TOE stands for transesophageal echocardiogram, also known as an ultrasound that's done through the esophagus. Basically, a camera, ultrasound camera, is going through the esophagus, and the esophagus sits next to the heart. So an ultrasound can be done very close to the heart, and then the ejection fraction can be determined. So I keep talking about ejection fraction. What does it mean? Ejection fraction basically is the contractility of the heart, and it's measured in percentage. Now, a lot of patients with heart failure have an ejection fraction less than 40%, and that is very low. And what that means is, it means that inotropes are needed, or vasopressors such as dobutamine, milrinone, potentially levosimendan, to improve the contractility of the heart. Because especially after a heart attack, the heart muscle, or some of the heart muscles, would be weakened, and therefore, with the heart muscles being weakened, you get a poor contractility, right? Now, after a heart attack, often the heart muscle or the tissue of the heart, are damaged irreversibly. Okay, so therefore there's only a part of the heart muscle still working, and therefore it's important that you improve the contractility there to an extent where obviously one can have a functioning heart, perfuse all organs, maintain a decent blood pressure, and pump fluids around the body. So that is really important. Now, Another thing that might happen, especially when it comes to kidney failure, I mentioned that, you know, this particular patient might go on dialysis or continuous renal replacement therapy, CRRT, via a dialysis machine. Or another option for that, for a patient like this, is to start off with diuretics such as furosemide or Lasix. Okay, furosemide or Lasix are diuretics that increase urine output, which is obviously what is needed when it comes to kidney failure, but it's also needed when it comes to poor ejection fraction or poor contractility of the heart. Because imagine if your heart is not pumping at 100% and you have too many fluids in your body, the heart would struggle, which is why our reader says fluid overload. Okay, so the systems need to be finely tuned, whether it's the heart, lungs, kidneys, liver. It's all one system, and all organs connect to each other, as you can see now. So what are the next steps when someone is on ECMO? What needs to happen? Well, again, after a few days, there needs to be a reassessment whether the heart is pumping well enough, and that can be done by looking at, you know, heart rate, blood pressure, how many inotropes are needed. One can look at arterial blood gases. One can look at the ejection fraction, as I mentioned. Other ways to manage that are with PA catheters or Swan-Ganz catheters, where a catheter is inserted in the pulmonary artery, and then things like SVR can be measured, systemic vascular resistance, things can be measured such as cardiac output, cardiac index, and that'll also give you a very good indication how much support is needed for the heart. Can ECMO be removed, or at least support reduced by reducing the liters per minute, you know, or by reducing the revs, and that's how one can wean down ECMO. So it's usually a process. It's not as simple as people can just, you know, remove ECMO. It's often a process over days, sometimes even over weeks. ECMO can also be used as a bridge to a heart transplant, right? And if for whatever reason someone is on ECMO for heart failure, and is on ECMO for heart failure, and there's no heart transplant in sight, ECMO can also be used for a VAD insertion. VAD stands for ventricular assist device, which can take over the function of one of the ventricles in the heart. There's the right ventricle and there's the left ventricle in the heart. And you can either use an LVAD, which stands for left ventricular assist device, or RVAD, which stands for right ventricular assist device. And then a patient can even go home on those devices whilst waiting for a heart transplant. So I hope that helps to explain some of why people go on ECMO and what's the process to get people off ECMO. Now, what I should also say is, and I've done videos and articles about this in the not too recent past, ECMO can also be used for lung failure, for example, for ARDS or pneumonia, especially in the last 2 years with COVID, with the pandemic. A lot of patients with lung failure ended up on ECMO for lung failure, and it has saved many lives, right? ECMO can definitely save lives, and generally speaking, people that are on ECMO in ICU are the sickest patients in the ICU. That I can tell you without the shadow of a doubt. They're generally speaking the sickest patient in the ICU. Okay, so I hope that answers some of those questions now. Now, what other questions are there? Here is another question from a reader that we have. Being unsure what to expect as my mum comes out of being sedated for 14 days and waking up with a tracheostomy attached to the ventilator. That is another fantastic question from Natasha. Well, Natasha, the reality is that everybody is very unsure what to expect when someone comes out of an induced coma. It's not unique to you as a daughter to your mum. Even for ICU doctors, ICU nurses, it is very unpredictable what's happening in ICU. You know, whilst you can map out pathways for certain patients, you know, intensive care is very unpredictable. And the only thing that is predictable in ICU is that it's unpredictable. Okay, so again, you're saying being unsure what to expect as my mum comes out of being sedated for 14 days and waking up with a tracheostomy attached to the ventilator. The whole purpose of doing a tracheostomy after 14 days of ventilation in ICU is, generally speaking, to minimize and reduce sedation to help a critically ill patient to get off the ventilator. Okay, so when someone is ventilated in ICU with a breathing tube and a tracheostomy, if someone is ventilated in ICU with a breathing tube or an endotracheal tube and is waiting for a tracheostomy, they are being sedated because a breathing tube or an endotracheal tube is so uncomfortable in the mouth that they need to be sedated. They also need to be sedated because of their critical condition. They also need to be sedated to rest. You know, there's a whole range of reasons why people need to be sedated in ICU. By the same token, if then someone can't come off the ventilator because you can't wake them up, or they're agitated when you wake them up, or they're simply not strong enough to get off that ventilator in the first place, you know, it does make sense then to look at a tracheostomy. When it then comes to a tracheostomy, then sedation can be switched off, because a tracheostomy, unlike a breathing tube or an endotracheal tube, is painless. Okay, it's painless, and therefore sedation can be switched off. Now, here is the tricky part. Okay, depending on what your mother was sedated with, and I did do a live stream on that topic last week, you know, should one use propofol or should you use midazolam or Versed? And, you know, the answer was probably that one should stay clear of the midazolam or Versed, simply because it's a benzodiazepine and it's addictive in nature. So why is this important in your situation? Well, if your mum, for example, was sedated for the last 2 weeks with midazolam or Versed, and they now stop that midazolam or Versed because she now has a tracheostomy, she might go through withdrawal, because unlike propofol, which is a short-acting sedative, midazolam or Versed is addictive in nature because it's a benzodiazepine. Okay, and if your mum is off sedation now and she's withdrawing from midazolam or Versed, that could potentially set her back. You know, because now she's not only dealing with her critical illness, she's not only dealing with trying to get off the ventilator, she's also dealing with a withdrawal situation where she's trying to, you know, where she's withdrawing from a highly addictive medication. So you're right to say, you know, that you're concerned about what to expect, what happens once your mom is off sedation, right? Very, very reasonable concern to have, okay? So what should happen next? Well, what should happen next, Natasha, is your mom should be taken off all sedation, if possible at all. If she had sustained multiple trauma, for example, if she's been in a motor vehicle accident or anything, you know, where she had surgery and she's still in pain, you know, she might still need pain medication. You haven't shared that, so I don't know. But, you know, assuming she's not in pain, she should be free of all sedation and pain medications. And then the ICU should focus on physiotherapy or physical therapy. The ICU should be focusing on mobilizing her. The ICU should be focusing on doing breathing exercises. The ICU should be focusing on slowly but gradually reducing the support from the ventilator. The ICU should be slowly but gradually moving towards taking her off the ventilator, even if it's only for 5 minutes to begin with. Okay, so it's very important for the ICU to do that. And you know, when I'm saying they need to mobilize her, what does that look like? As I said, they should start with range of motion, physical therapy, physiotherapy. Then they should continue with getting her in a recliner chair or in a tilt chair. You know, there are chairs that you can put next to the bed. You can put the chairs flat. You can slide a patient over into that chair, and then you can sit them up. So, you know, there are so many ICUs that we're dealing with when we are dealing with our clients and families. They're saying, oh, we can't mobilize them. And that's just a whole lot of nonsense, right? Most ICUs that I worked in, we always mobilize patients, irrespective of their conditions. Now, you can't mobilize a patient, obviously, if they had multiple fractures, you know, or they have contraindications to mobilization. But a tracheostomy and ventilation is not a contraindication to mobilization. Forget about that. Most ICUs want to tell you that a tracheostomy or a ventilator is a contraindication to mobilization, and that's just complete and utter nonsense, right? So picture this: we are providing services, intensive care at home for long-term intensive care patients. Now, our clients at home are not lying in bed all day. We mobilize them on a ventilator with a tracheostomy, and we go out with them. Okay, we go out with them all day, every day, so they have quality of life. So if ICU is telling you they can't mobilize your loved one, it's a whole lot of crap. Excuse my language, but that is, you know, mobilization is inevitable in ICU to get patients better, especially since there's so much deconditioning in ICU. What do I mean by deconditioning? Every day a patient goes into an induced coma, and every day, you know, they are lying in ICU in a bed, on a ventilator, on a breathing tube. They're in an induced coma. There's a lot of muscle wastage fairly quickly, you know, and the longer someone stays on a ventilator in an induced coma, the more they decondition, and that's why you need to move towards taking someone off a ventilator as quickly as possible. Okay, so I hope that helps, Natasha, because again, the longer someone stays on a ventilator, the more deconditioning. Okay, so you gotta make sure that your loved one comes off the ventilator as quickly as possible. And how can you make sure your loved one comes off the ventilator as quickly as possible? You need to ask the right questions. Most families in intensive care simply don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to look for. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know their rights, and they don't know how to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care. So that's the bottom line. And, you know, the longer someone stays on a ventilator with a tracheostomy, also the higher chances are they will need it for longer, potentially for the rest of their lives, right? So therefore, you need to ask the right questions even before your loved one has a tracheostomy. Okay, so because you don't want to look at options such as intensive care at home, because your loved one can't come off the ventilator, right? So you got to know what you're dealing with, and you got to know what you're looking for. Okay. I hope that helps, Natasha. Reach out to me, of course, through the usual channels. You can call me on one of the numbers on the top of the website, or you can send us an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com as well. Okay, next. I have another question here from another reader, and then I want to wrap it up today. The question is a short one, but it says, I want to know when my loved one can go in peace. That's a great question. And, you know, you haven't shared really why your loved one is in ICU. But what I will say is this. You know, a lot of families are faced, when they have a loved one in ICU, they're faced with issues such as, you know, oh, it's your loved one won't have any quality of life. They won't survive. Let's stop treatment. The ICU team will talk about doom and gloom and will be negative all day, every day. So 90% of intensive care patients survive. Okay. So you got to ask the question, if they survive, if 90% of the patients survive, which is the overwhelming majority of intensive care patients, why should your loved one be the 1 out of 10 that doesn't survive? That's the first question I would ask to you. If your loved one dies in ICU because the intensive care team suggests to withdraw treatment, you know, one could argue, is that euthanasia? Is it hastening death? You know, why would you not give your loved one the best chance to survive? I don't know, I can't answer that question for you, but what I will suggest to you is to do as much research as possible and not give up. That's what I will suggest to you, because the overwhelming majority of intensive care patients do survive in ICU. Okay, and that's all I can say. It doesn't talk about what does their quality of life look like down the line. You know, it doesn't say that. But the majority of intensive care patients survive. And, you know, I can't talk about how can your loved one go peacefully. I think your loved one can go peacefully if everything that is possible for your loved one in ICU has been done. That's when I think your loved one can go peacefully, which also leads me to, you know, perceived versus real end-of-life situations in intensive care. A perceived end-of-life situation is simply when the intensive care team tells you that your loved one might die and that it's in their quote-unquote best interest to die, because they won't have any perceived quality of life, but there is reason to believe that your loved one's life can be saved. Okay, so that is a perceived end-of-life situation. A real end-of-life situation is if someone is in ICU and despite everyone's best efforts and despite all possible treatment, a life can't be saved. Okay, so that's the difference there. So I think, Randy, you should be asking about, is it a real or a perceived end-of-life situation, right? And again, I have written about this extensively. I've done videos about real versus perceived end-of-life situations. I have done countless videos and blog posts about, when to stop life support in intensive care. All right, I think I'll wrap it up here. So I've answered some questions, and if you have any questions still, you can call in live on the show. I published the phone numbers below this video, or you can just type them into the chat pad here. Now, if you have a loved one in intensive care, go to our website, intensivecarehotline.com, call us on one of the numbers on the top of the website, or simply send us an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com. I do offer one-to-one consulting and advocacy over the phone, via Skype, via Zoom, via email, via WhatsApp, whichever mode of communication works best for you. I also, as part of my one-to-one consulting and advocacy service, I also participate in any meetings you have with the doctors. Often the dynamics change very quickly once you have someone on a call that can actually ask all the right questions, that can talk on a medical level to intensive care teams. Once I'm on a call, you will actually see that I'm asking questions you haven't even considered asking, but that open up a new dimension for you, and that open up a new level of control and power for you, because then you really know that ICU teams are only telling you half of the story unless you ask all the right questions. Now, we also offer a membership for families of critically ill patients in intensive care at intensivecaresupport.org. You can check it out there. Like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel for updates for families in intensive care and for future live streams. Click the notification bell, comment below what you want to see next, and share this video with anyone, with your friends, with your family, and anyone that you think can benefit from this video. Also, if you want a medical record review, just click on the medical record review page, and we can help you from there. Look out for the next live stream. The next live stream will be next Saturday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time. That'll be Saturday, the 30th of April. The live stream will go ahead also Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Sydney, Melbourne time, which is Sunday, the 1st of May. And as I said, 8:30 p.m. Saturday, Eastern Standard Time in North America. Thank you so much for watching. This is Patrik Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I will see you very soon. Take care.